Tanya Sriracha has been replaced by Lydia Diamond at the table. Because the people watching want to know who's who. Tanya will be at the next table. Tanya, you'll be at the next table. No. We're good.
You came up to us and you said, well, what have you said?
Yeah, and then I said, I thought it was Tanya, so I went over and told them it was Tanya. But it's not Tanya. So Lydia raised her hand. Tanya's going into the next one. Anyway, so here we go. We have a few people who are going to straggle in because they're waiting for the last shuttle, but all of you who got here, let's just go, okay? So the point this morning is to start to move toward synthesis and toward next steps. And so this first table, and I want to be able to sit back and listen because I've been so in it that I haven't actually heard it. So I'm going to sit back and listen to the synthesis as well. And Ed Sobel, who's been part of this project from the beginning, Ed was actually a consultant to the design of the whole institute programming and early mentor to the producing fellows. And so I've asked Ed to step in and run the table for us. And this group of people to try to pull together all this conversation that we've had with the goal of bringing to the table things that have been discussed that maybe haven't necessarily made it to the table, and also to identify the hot threads that are still up as we move into this notion of next steps. So synthesize away. Ed Sobel.
Thanks, David. David's done a very dangerous thing, which is to make me listen for 3 days and then stick me in front of a microphone. But I'm going to try to sit on my hands or tongue or something for a few minutes and let the people at the table talk. So you hear our charge, which is to try to synthesize some of what we've been hearing in the breakouts, and I'll include the bar or the party in that charge too, and say what are some of the things that we're hearing that are sticking with and that we want to kind of bring to the table in a fuller way.
What if I jump in?
Yes, you have to say who you are. I learned that lesson.
Amelia Cachapero, TCG. I love words, and just hearing words and the meaning of them resonating through a conversation is always very interesting to me. And I'm a list maker, so I make lists of lots of different things just in life. Is kind of my MO. So out of the first, there were just a bunch of words that stood out of each session for me, and I don't know if they're going to resonate for anybody else, but they did come through in some of our discussions as well. On that first day, the early discussion, time, playground, purpose, ownership, and control were out of that early, if we can remember, way to the way back. And then the second discussion section that we had, king-making, truth-telling, elemental nature, and then more. This was still, I guess, only Thursday. Value. This was the diversity one. I remember this. Value, community, and responsibility. And some things. I think this was yesterday. Mentorship, and then David's big word of alignment. An alignment of resources, of values, of community and audiences, of goals and intention, and alignment of the overall field. So that's what I heard.
Great. Well, we could pick any one of those words probably and spend some time on it. But other thoughts?
Go for it. Well, just maybe two. I would. David just ambushed me and asked me to join this table about 5 minutes ago. But
all of us.
Yeah, all of us. Okay. But maybe just two big things that I've heard and also been talking about in conversations. I mean, obviously there was all this buzz about Rocco's, and I wasn't here that day, but about Rocco's statement, "We have too many theaters," and it was quoted in the article in the Washington Post this morning. But I've been thinking about that. I mean, I don't think it's about buildings. I don't think it's about how many buildings we have to make theater. Buildings aren't theater. They're just a place for it. But it is worth asking, I think, from that, are we doing too many shows, and are we doing all of those shows with a purpose? And I do think that there's a really positive trend, and it's part of this cooperation. I know what I'm going through personally is that I'm actually doing only 3 new productions next year. Now, we're actually bringing one back as well from the past. But I like the notion that as a field, collectively, we could find ways, and I think we're starting to already, to capitalize on those special shows that will cross from one community to another, that can move around the country, other than necessarily going to New York. There's got to be, and we're exploring at Woolley, bringing a show next year to a theater on the West Coast, so that's like a new thing for us. But of course we have sort of proactive co-productions happening, but I mean sort of reactive co-productions, where something special emerges, and then creating networks to take advantage of those, and using that as a way, in some way, to create more of a national conversation in the Newplay field, and in some cases to reduce the burden on so many new shows, so that we can all focus on the ones that really have the most meaning and the most purpose for us. So that interests me as like a more rational response to, in my view, to Rocco's idea of too many theaters. I don't think it's about theaters. It's about how much work are we making, why are we making that work, and how are we capitalizing on that work as a field on the back end in order to galvanize audiences and to learn from one another around the country. I'm repeating myself. So the second big thing that I know I've been thinking about through the whole thing was sort of about new, longer, deeper kinds of collaboration. And I guess that can happen on lots of levels. But the big thing that I've been thinking about is 2 things. One is, there's things that I could do early in my career that I can't do now. And I can't do them now because I'm trying to pay people more money. So, you know, when you're starting out, or, you know, you can ask people to get together to do some screwing around in the rehearsal hall and play with stuff, and you're only paying them pennies, and actually you can make better art in some cases when you're a beginner for that very reason. And I'm really interested in how we can use resources to create longer rehearsal periods, deeper collaborations among designers, directors, how we can, there was a lot of talk about sharing of resources and space that didn't involve money, but I actually think most often it does involve money, because we want to pay people for their time. So it's like, how do we use resources to get outside the box of how we operate, to sort of target money to places that are exploratory, experimental. Let's just try something. Let's get some people in a room and see what happens. Let's have a longer rehearsal period. Let's be able to have more cast members in a given show. All of that stuff, rather than feeling that we want to focus on perfecting what we're doing in the box that we're already in, recognizing that it has its limits, and trying to funnel resources to get outside of the box, rather than just say, okay, well, what are the best practices inside the box? Those are 2 big reflections.
Great. Neil, you were, I think, waiting.
Yeah, I guess the thing that I've been thinking a lot about in this discussion is kind of the role of the presenting community, because we're not as well represented in this particular gathering. It seems like there's a lot of work that can be done and will be done between producers and presenters, and that's a very rich, I think, part of this discussion that we have not been able to yet animate. It's one of my favorite words, as you know, in terms of resources, and so I think there's going to be some additional discussions that need to be had around that. That also begs the question for me about the voices of those who are not at this particular convening, and I bring that up because I was interviewed for HowlRound, and they were asking me, did I think, you know, was it an abundant time or was it a scarcity time? And I frankly do think it's a very abundant time in terms of the amount of work, the quality of ideas, the number of people that are engaged in this sector. But in fact, I think if we had a different group of voices around the table, that they might have a very different impression of how and where these resources are being used, and who is allowed to play and who is not allowed to play. And so I think there is a whole nother discussion around both of the voices who aren't here in terms of, other kinds of parts of our sector, and even the peers of ours who are not here. We all think of, I wonder why I'm here and so-and-so isn't here, right? Who might also have a different perception around these issues. And so I don't want us to forget that. The other thing, of course, not of course, but in presenting that is really important is what I call the end game around the audience and community. And so, it's not often that we're able to just do work because we love the artists and we love what they're doing. It has to do with how that artist's work will resonate with a particular community that we feel that we serve. And it's partially because our runs are shorter and the opportunity for exchange is a little bit more truncated, that we don't have the ability to just do things that are not going to draw an audience to it.
I sort of hate David Dower for putting me on this panel because it's so late in the weekend and I can't really remember much of what was said. Last night was late, but what I'm realizing...
But you were dancing.
We were dancing, which is, I think, the first thing that at every time we get together as theater people, we must dance. But what I realized that I remember very strongly is how we talked. And it's something that I think I've been tracking because I have felt, and maybe I'm the only one, a tension between our responsibility to think for the field and our ability as individuals who work in this multi-tentacled field to speak from our experience in a way that we come together and in some ways exemplify the field or stand in for the field. And so there were moments in the roundtables that I remember very vividly where someone either told a personal story in a way that was particularly powerful for us, or that the table would try to deal with the problem rather than talk about how the field could deal with the problem, the table would. So, for example, the table that I was at around partnerships, somebody started a conversation about, is there some way that we can partner up at this table to talk about how to deal with diversity? And so, Jenny from Seven Devils was talking about one thing, Gabe from New Jersey Rep was talking about another, and we were trying to sort of figure out how to guide them to the people or the way. It was a very silly thing, but it felt actually really risky. Our devising table, we devised a piece. It was like a 5-minute video of us dancing and doing a tone poem around scarcity and abundance. And there was something, no one must ever see this video, but...
I heard it's already on YouTube, though.
But it was, I don't know how other people felt, but I think it was Aimee who sort of brought it up, and then it was like, well, dare we? Dare we try to, and it is that phrase that I've never in my life used, but I kept thinking it this week, dare we be the change that we wish for, in the way that we talk to ourselves. I remember Jim Nicola in the original, one of the first meetings, talking very movingly about what he was charged with when he first came to New York Theater Workshop back in '88 or whatever that is, and how that charge influences everything he does. So, this is all a long way of saying, I feel that we have stories around this room and around this table that if we can get past this, and we did this weekend, it's one of the great things about being together in a relatively small group for a relatively long time, that to get past the sort of self-congratulations and promoting and fronting for our own organizations, and just kind of share our own deep stories, that we take so much away and we create some of the partnerships and the connectivity, and we model for ourselves even the authenticity of the conversation. That's what I've really been noticing.